So this morning, I'd like to think about, in terms of our Christian walk, in terms of our faith, what is it that motivates us? And what will we do as a response to that motivation? So you can see the title slide, and you've got those two words there, and I'm not going to say them for you. I want you to say them in your head. So I'll give you a moment to say that. What we're going to do next is listen to some different Christians' ways of saying that, and also their motivations behind why they say what they say. So the first group of Christians that we're going to talk about would say this phrase, "Now what?" And there would be all kinds of exclamation points behind that. And if you look at this group of people, you notice the first thing off is that they are very busy. They are always moving, and we might call them the Energizer Bunny Christians. They're always doing and going and going and going and going and going. And you would say, why? Well, let's ask them. So they might say, well, somebody has to do it, so it might as well be me. Well, that is very innocent and also very generous. That's great. I like to feel useful. Well, that's good in and of itself. I'd like to feel valuable. Okay. I'd like to feel important. That's a bit of a slippery slope right there. I like to be in charge, and I want to be in control. Oh, did I say that out loud? So full disclosure, as a lot of you who know me know, there's a reason that I understand how these people think. Some Bible examples of this kind of Christian would be Martha, in charge of the dinner, in charge of the food, in charge of the wine, in charge of servants, in charge of anything, in charge of everything. Or Peter, jumping into the boat, jumping out of the boat, making tabernacles, slashing people's ears off, all with good intentions. We also might think about what we might call the resume Christian, the rich young ruler that Pastor Matt talked about a couple of weeks ago. You can just see him with his little clay tablet there and his stylus saying, "Teacher, what must I do to get eternal life?" Here's what I know about psychology. That is not my background, but here's what I know about it. If we're doing something and we get rewarded for doing that thing, we're going to keep doing that thing because it got us something good. And if we remember back, it starts early with mommy's little treat for being good. So we have this cycle of action and reward and more action and more rewards and more action and more rewards. As Christians, we can do all kinds of things. We can serve in all kinds of ways, and it might not be in God's will. So those are not bad things, but they might not be in His will. The doing in that situation becomes the motivation. We do because it makes us feel good, and we do it some more, and that's what's motivating us. So there's some flaws in that plan. The first one would be, if we're doing this action and it's out of God's will, then we are the ones that are directing it. We are the ones that are making that happen. And He does ask us to love each other and care for each other, but doing nice things is not necessarily doing His will. The second flaw in this plan is, if we're doing all of these things and they're not in His will, we don't get that sense of the fact that it's right. So we might start with a different kind of circle. This is more of a spiral. I think this is right. It feels pretty good. I'm not sure. Maybe it's good. I don't know. I think it's okay. What do you think? Maybe should I change it? And you can see how that goes. The third flaw in the plan is, if we are working out of God's will, that completely steers us away from where we want to be, which is in God's will. I mean, we never would intentionally go contrary to the will of the Creator of the universe. Why would we do that? And the fourth flaw in that plan is, if we're doing something out of God's will, then we never learn that dependence on Him, and we never learn how to obey Him. So everything that we do, anything that consumes our hearts, mind, soul, or strength, must pass through the lens of God's will first. Or else it's no different than that shiny apple. And you know which one I'm talking about. That object that draws our attention away from anything and everything else, including God. We have a second group of Christians, and they would say this phrase, something like this. Now what? And we might call them the reluctant or wallflower Christians, and their motivation is to no action. I just don't have any more room on my plate right now. That is not my job. I'm sorry, I'm just not able to do that right now. I don't think I have the skill set for that. I'm not really that comfortable doing that thing. Or, no, you know what? I am drawing the line. I am not doing that. Not there, not for them. So a Bible hero that I can relate to in this particular group is Moses. And he had all kinds of reasons and excuses for why he was not the right man to lead these people out of Israel, or out of Egypt, not to lead Israel out of Egypt. And he said these things to God. The people won't believe that you sent me. I'm really just not very good with words. I don't think Pharaoh's going to listen to me. And his last rebuttal was this classic, please, Lord, send anyone else. But spoiler alert, he did not send anyone else, as you may know, or you can read about it in Exodus. What is Christianity if not the decision to accept the Lordship of Christ? Is it not an agreement to follow Jesus as he invited us? If we're following, that implies that our footsteps are in his footsteps. We're not lagging somewhere behind, checking to see if he's up there still. We're not going and doing and here and there, just checking back in every once in a while to see if he's still there. We're not rushing ahead with this super great, exciting idea that's perfect and looking to see if he's going to catch up to us. That's not following. We don't have to follow Jesus. We don't have to follow Jesus. It's totally our choice. But if we decide that's what we're going to do, then we need to do it. Because otherwise it's false, it's fake, and there's no truth in it. We're going to read this morning from John 12:26. And these are the words of Jesus. Anyone who wants to serve me must follow me, because my servants must be where I am, and the Father will honor anyone who serves me. Our third group of Christians would say this phrase, if you want to go back to the title phrase there. They would say this phrase, now what? And we would call these people obedient servant Christians. And their motivation is trusting in God. They do not work from a point of self-focus. They're not working out of a fear or a refusal of God's will. They're working from a love of God, which naturally then goes to a love of others and a love of ourselves. So there's some challenges to this lifestyle of being an obedient servant. The first one is we are imperfect humans, and at times we have strong wills. Perhaps all the time we have strong wills. And we would say something like this to God, yeah, no, I don't like that, and I'm not going to do it, and if I have to do it, I am not going to be happy. So what we need to do there is listen to the Holy Spirit, who's telling us that God is God, and we are not. In him, all things are created. In him, all things hold their being, and in him, all things have their meaning. Our second challenge to living as obedient servants is our own self-doubt. And we say, yeah, I don't have the skills for that. I'm not wealthy enough. And I'm probably not even spiritual enough for that. And you know what? We're not. Jesus even said that in John 15:4-5. Oops. One before that. John 15:4-5 says, remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, and you are the branches. And those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. So we all agree on that. The third challenge of living as an obedient servant is that we often want to limit God. We want to look at things from our narrow human perspective. And when we look around, we see all kinds of problems, but we don't see all kinds of solutions. And we think, yeah, no, that's impossible. But the Bible is full of all kinds of stories of the impossible to show that with God, nothing is impossible. An ark built in the desert, the walls of a fortress city falling down simply because people shouted because they believed in the God that was faithful to them, a giant taken down by just a small stone. So now that we've looked at these challenges to being obedient servants, which would be our will, our doubts, our human perspective, now we can look at some benefits. Psalm 37:3 says, "Trust in the Lord and do good, and then you will live safely in the land and prosper." So I think that's probably an okay place to stop, but we're not going to. Little tease there. So the second benefit of living as an obedient servant would be that being obedient increases our faith. We talked earlier about Moses, and after he got past his yeah-no stage, he did agree to this crazy plan that God had made up. And at the end of this 40 years of leading the people, he was reflecting back on everything that he had seen. And a lot of you know these stories, but the mighty waters parted so that people could walk through on dry land. For 40 years, there was food for 500,000 people that was renewed every morning. Their clothes never wore out. The dangers were pushed back. They had guidance day and night. And these are Moses' words in Deuteronomy 7:9. He said, "Understand, therefore, that the Lord your God is indeed God. He is the faithful God who keeps his covenant for 1,000 generations, and he lavishes his unfailing love on those who love him and obey his commands." Moses' obedience increased Moses' faith. The third benefit to obedience is that it will increase the faith of those around us. It's possible that God may call us to be his hands and feet, however that looks. But even if people aren't directly impacted or directly benefiting from the things that we do, they're still watching us. And they're watching to see what we do and why we do it. And that's our motivation coming back into play again. You might remember the story of David. He came as a shepherd boy to visit his brothers who had been in the king's army, and they'd been kind of at a standoff with this Philistine army whose big warrior was this giant guy named Goliath. So David came to check on his brothers for his father, and here's the giant giving everyone a challenge. And so he decided he was going to do something about it. One thing that I wanted to mention about obedience is that sometimes we need to not act because it's not our fight. So when David went against Goliath, the king said, "Well, let me help you. Let me give you my royal sword and put this armor on that was made for a much taller man." And David did, but then he took it all back off. And he said instead, I'm not going to do that. What he said instead was, "Today, people will know that it is not by spear or sword that God saves, because this battle is the Lord's." You get a little soundtrack to the rest of my speaking here. So David took it all off. So for 40 days, these guys had been watching Goliath. And you can imagine that when the stone left that sling and the giant fell down dead, all of those men knew a little something more about David's faith. And they knew a lot of something more about David's God. So our obedience increases the faith of those around us. So I have a couple of scenarios that I wanted to give to you. The first is a man who's very wealthy, and he spent quite a lot of time tracking down a really obscure address so that he could deliver a care package to a poor family. The second scenario is a man who he just doesn't leave his house. He doesn't go out much. He's happy for people to visit him, but he really just writes letters and notes, and he just doesn't go out. So I wanted you to, with a show of hands, vote on which one you think is the obedient servant. So go ahead and feel free to raise your hands. Is it the first man who tracked down that poor family to give them a gift? Who thinks that's the obedient servant? And who thinks it's the second man who just never really left home and just kind of did his thing with the writing and that? Okay. Well, even though you didn't actually vote, you probably had a thought in your mind about which one you wanted to vote for, but you're all right, because they were both obedient servants. The first man is one of the group that we usually refer to as the three wise men. And he followed a star, of all things, to find this girl and lay a gift of gold at her feet. And you'll hear more about him next week. The second is a man that we refer to as Paul. And he wrote a lot of letters to churches that were across the 600-mile radius of ministry and to people that he had met when he was ministering. About the letters that he wrote make up about half of what we call the New Testament. And some of the letters, like Ephesians or Philippians, remember, I can do all things through God who strengthens me, those were written while he was under house arrest in Rome. So he could not leave his house. So these are different people with different gifts and different abilities and different callings, but they had the same motivation, which is that they trusted God and they were obedient to him. So the question this morning is, what is obedience and how do we achieve it? And how do we keep it the motivation for everything that we do? And the first thing is that we want to hear to listen. We want to listen to God speaking. There's a lot of stuff going on in our lives at any given moment. There's all kinds of clutter in our lives. And what we need to do at that point, instead of letting all of this go on, is we need to put it away. We need to intentionally make room for God in our lives. We need to be quiet. And we need to be ready. Isaiah 30:21 says, from the New International Version, which is going to be different than what's here, it says, whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. God is not going to force himself on us, but he is always there waiting for us to listen to him. And then after we do listen to him and hear what he has to say, we do what he says. And we do it with faith. And we do it knowing that he who promised can do it. And it will be more than we can measure, more than we can ask for, more than we can even imagine. And that's where our action, reward cycle is good. The things that he will do in us are not going to be the same. The things that he asks each of us to do is going to be different from maybe that of our neighbor, because we're not all the same, and we're not going to have all the same abilities, but we are all part of one whole. We're part of a body. We're like different portions of a body. We each have a different function. We have different work that we need to be doing. As this happens, again, we're going to be asked to do different things. So all we have to do is not worry about what our neighbor's thing is and whether our neighbor is following God properly, because that's God's deal. He'll take care of that. All we need to do is do that thing that he asks us to do, no more and no less. And when we do that, we're acting first from our love from God, and our results are going to speak for themselves. So that work that we want to do, that's going to get done. God's going to make sure that the people who need it are going to be helped, served, fed, encouraged, loved. And he might use us to do it, but he will see to it. Another benefit of living this way is that we're, again, part of a whole. We're not doing this ministry by ourselves. We are in connection with each other, right here in this room, and with all of the believers. And we are all supported. We're not having to do this alone. And the other thing, the most important part of doing this, is that we are going to be truly following where Jesus leads. Mark 16:15 in the Living Bible says, you are to go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone, everywhere. So this morning, We talked about these things. Trust, listening, acting. How is that going to look for you? I'd like you to think about that. How is it going to look in your life? Maybe this whole concept of following Jesus is new, and you are going to want to explore that more. Maybe today it's time for a restart with your life or with following God, and you're ready to just kind of have a new start. Maybe today, because you've been ignoring God, not making eye contact, and not doing what he asks you to do, it's time to say, yes, I will do that. Maybe you're already on track, and you just need a little encouragement to stay the course. We're going to be playing a song here in just a moment that I'd like you to listen to. And while you're listening to that, I'd like you to pray your heart. Whatever that is that God is telling you and asking you, and all those things that he's surrounding you with, think about that. There's definitely time this morning, and we're all among friends.
I don't want to hear anymore. Teach me to listen. I don't want to see anymore. Give me a vision that you could move this heart to be set apart. I don't need to recognize the man in the mirror, and I don't want to trade your plan for something familiar. I can't waste a day, I can't stay the same. I wanna be different, I wanna be changed, till all of me is gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different in me. And I don't want to spend my life stuck in a pattern, and I don't want to gain this world but lose what matters. So I'm giving up everything because I want to be different. I wanna be changed till all of me is gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different. Oh, I know that I am far from perfect, but through you the cross still says I'm worth it. So take this beating in my heart and come and finish what you started. When they see me, let them see you, 'cause I just wanna be different, yeah. I wanna be different, I wanna be changed till all of me is gone, and all that remains, oh, is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different. I just wanna be different. So could you be different in me?
I'd like to give you a little bit of encouragement this morning from the book of Philippians, which incidentally was one of those books written by Paul. For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. And also from 2 Thessalonians. So we keep on praying for you, asking our God to enable you to live a life worthy of his call. May he give you the power to accomplish all the good things your faith prompts you to do. And then the name of our Lord Jesus will be honored because of the way you live, and you will be honored along with him. Would you pray with me this morning? Lord, we just pray, as David did in the Psalms,